David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Jeffrey Epstein, the alleged sex trafficker who was accused, of course, along with Donald Trump, of raping a 13-year-old girl, was found dead in his jail cell of what's being called an apparent suicide. And of course, the conspiracy theory surrounding his death predictably and just instantly exploding. Disclaimer, once again, this story and all of the ones related to it, or last week's shootings and all of this stuff, will be fully demonetized by YouTube, as they have been for the entire week. Consider supporting the work we do directly, because YouTube has determined that all of these stories are not ad or brand safe. Epstein was arrested and awaiting trial on charges of sexually abusing dozens of young girls. Epstein had been put on suicide watch after being found with what seemed to be a self-inflicted wound, then was taken off of suicide watch 12 days before he was found hanged in his cell. Why he was taken off of suicide watch is currently unclear. That's becoming part of the conspiracy theories surrounding this. And we have to start sort of unpacking it with the logic of the conspiracist. One of the ideas is he was taken off of suicide watch so that he would kill himself, or it wasn't really suicide. He was taken off of suicide watch to create a cover for someone to murder him, and then for it to be called a suicide because, hey, he was taken off of suicide watch anyway. One way or the other, immediately, a whole bunch of elected officials want an investigation. This includes senators. This includes Donald Trump's Attorney General William Barr and others. And of course, Trump's Justice Department, being the department that will now carry forward whatever investigation is going to take place, is extraordinarily problematic, according to many, because of the connections between Epstein and Trump in and of themselves. Now, I have to tell you, the main conspiracy sort of doesn't make that much sense in terms of motive, given that it is much more complex than the simplest murder hypothesis that exists. Or let me put it a different way. The idea is Epstein was about to pull Trump into the mess. Documents might show that Epstein was recruiting young girls at Mar-a-Lago, or there might have been something revealed related to the girl that Epstein allegedly raped, who was also allegedly raped by Donald Trump when she was 13 years old at the Manhattan condo of Jeffrey Epstein. So the idea is, let's silence him. Let's arrange for him to be killed. But step back for just 1 second. Believed child abusers are not treated well in prisons and jails. They are some of the primary targets of violence outside of gang-related violence in jails and prisons. If you want to go in the direction of this wasn't suicide, it was murder, which, by the way, I'm open to. I'm not dismissing this by any means. You don't actually need to go to it was a political murder involving Trump or whoever else. Child sex abusers are targeted in the prison system, and it requires far fewer explanations and assumptions other than why was he taken off of suicide watch, if indeed that is part of the entire circumstance. Now, of course, immediately people are coming up with conspiracy theories that make no sense. For me, if you say, imagine this wasn't a suicide and it was a murder, who is most likely to have done it? Let's explore that. I've already said, if you look at a history of how this works in prisons, people in the prison system who go after child molesters would be like the number one culprits in my mind. Second, it would be something related to Trump or Mar-a-Lago because of those connections. But right-wingers heard about this apparent suicide and immediately said, oh, it's related to Dems or Hillary or something related to Pizzagate, or Bill Clinton was once in a picture with Jeffrey Epstein. This is another Clinton body count person or whatever. Epstein was super rich. Everyone in power knew him. Pictured with Bill Clinton, pictured in many pictures with Donald Trump. But we have specific allegations that Donald Trump raped a girl that Epstein also raped at Epstein's Manhattan condo. If we are simply theorizing, I have no idea why you go to the Clintons before you go to Trump. Not to mention Trump has a long history of sexualizing his own daughter. He's on video with Epstein evaluating the attractiveness of girls at a party. And by the way, if Bill Clinton or the Clintons in general are so powerful as these conspiracy theories require them or imply them to be, why weren't they able to just manipulate things and get Hillary Clinton elected? That is not one that they will often answer. One idea that's been floated is Epstein staged the first suicide attempt. In other words, the first suicide attempt was not really a suicide attempt. It was Epstein knowing that he was potentially in danger, doing something to get himself put on suicide watch, and that wasn't enough. That's another idea. Genuinely, I have no idea what happened, but I was not shocked when over the weekend I heard that he was found dead in his cell. I want to hear from you. What do you think happened here? Let me know, and ideally, maybe try to support it with some evidence as well. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this follow-up to the Jeffrey Epstein suicide, because there's so much to cover. But just as a brief follow-up, Donald Trump retweeted a conspiracy theory about Jeffrey Epstein, linking it to the Clintons, from a guy claiming that Jeffrey Epstein had info on Bill Clinton, and Epstein was about to release that info, and now the guy is dead. I'm showing you a screenshot of this. I'm not going to play the video. I don't think there would be anything to gain, so to speak, from playing the video. Trump also retweeted from an account called BNL Live. That is literally fake news. I'm using that term the correct way. I'm not using it the way Trump uses it to describe any news he doesn't like or that is negative about him. Breaking: documents were unsealed yesterday revealing that top Democrats, including Bill Clinton, took private trips to Jeffrey Epstein's pedophilia island. The president of the United States, either ignoring his own extensive connections to Jeffrey Epstein or specifically to distract from his own connections to Jeffrey Epstein, retweeting random conspiracy theorists and fake news websites. Is this the height of desperation to distract? Is this merely the height of idiocy? How are we to interpret this? And of course, I already told you the connections that Epstein had to the Clintons. He had 10 or 100 times the connections to Trump. Even being on video, as I said, as I played for you a couple of weeks ago, standing there with Jeffrey Epstein, evaluating the attractiveness of young girls, which ones are hot, which ones are not quite as hot. So Trump advisor and all-around terrible person Kellyanne Conway goes on Fox News over the weekend, and good for Fox, was actually confronted about Donald Trump retweeting this bottom-feeding pond scum garbage, and here's how she responded.
Why did the president then retweet that Clinton suggestion?
I think the president just wants everything to be investigated. As your reporter just revealed just the day before, there was some unsealed information implicating some people very high up. And I'm not going to repeat their names. You already did that. I'm not saying anything beyond that, and I won't. But I will say, Bill, that there's always this rush to, we need transparency, we need accountability when it involves fictional accusations like collusion with Russia to swing an election. This seems to be very concrete in that Jeffrey Epstein has done some very bad things over a number of years. And so let's continue to investigate that. I don't think that somebody's crimes and the accountability for that necessarily perishes with them. We know that the law can allow for many different investigations. Maybe there are co-conspirators, maybe there are not. But again, it's an active investigation. I think everybody should be at least relieved when an attorney general takes the action swiftly, as Attorney General Barr did yesterday.
Okay, let's see where that goes.
He's disturbed by this death, and let's see where it goes. It's really new. This all happened within the last 24 to 28 hours.
Understood. And we should go slow with this. Just back on the retweet quickly. It's clear what he was trying to say, wasn't it?
I think the president just wants everything to be investigated. And, trying to connect the president to this monster from years ago, where they're seen dancing in a video, versus other people who were actively, I suppose, flying around with this monster on his island, which was known as Pedophilia Island. Perhaps there's a public interest in knowing more about that.
Her explanation: Trump wants everything investigated, and Russia was a hoax. And well, maybe there is something there between Epstein and Bill Clinton. Meanwhile, step back from us for just a second from layer one of, was Epstein more involved with Clinton or more involved with Trump? I think we know the answer to that. We know about the joint allegations against Trump and Epstein by a 13-year-old. the Trump Justice Department and William Barr are now going to be in charge of the investigation into Epstein. So do you think that that's going to lead to anything implicating Trump? Laughable. Of course it's not. They control the investigation. And Kellyanne Conway saying, oh, Trump wants everything investigated. Well, what about the allegations against Epstein that relate to Trump personally, including Mar-a-Lago, including parties set up with dozens of young girls where the people planning the parties thought it was going to be some kind of big party? It was just for Epstein and Trump. The allegations against Epstein and Trump by the same 13-year-old girl, what about investigating that if Donald Trump really wants everything investigated? Apparently, they want everything other than Donald Trump's many connections to Jeffrey Epstein investigated. And you know what? They control the Justice Department. They ultimately control the investigation. They have oversight over the Bureau of Prisons. This is how it works. This is how swamp-filling, corrupt cronyism works. And more than likely, we will not hear anything else out of the administration that connects Trump to this in any way, because they're now running the show. Let me know what you think about what happened. Let me know what you think about the Trump connections. Let me know what you think about what's going to happen with investigations going forward. I'm genuinely at a loss. Let me know on Twitter at @dpacman. You can follow the show on Twitter at David Pakman Show. And while you're there, please follow us on Twitch, our newest platform, twitch.tv/David Pakman. I'll be streaming tomorrow, Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope that you will join me there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Andrew Hickox and Jeffrey Pemberton. Andrew and Jeffrey, thank you. Really appreciate the support from our viewers and listeners, whether you listen to the podcast or check out YouTube clips or watch the live streams on Twitch or whatever. The number one funding source for everything that we do is membership, and you can join at joinpakman.com. Also want to say thanks to Roddy Scherf, who is today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Roddy's been a member for almost 5 years. That's really awesome. And you can use the coupon code THISIS2020 to drop the price of a membership by 40% if you want. Don't feel obligated. By all means, full price is appreciated. Discounted is appreciated. It's just about getting buy-in from as many folks as possible. And that coupon code remains available, all one word, all lowercase. This is 2020. I have for you today maybe the single most disgusting picture or image from the Trump presidency. Donald Trump has done things that have had far-reaching implications and that affect way more individual people. But this picture and the story behind it represent the absolute basest low of the lows of the Trump presidency and really of Donald Trump as a person. Donald Trump went to El Paso, Texas to, I guess, offer some kind of comfort to the victims of the mass shooting that took place there last weekend. At least ostensibly, that's why he was going, although understandably, a ton of the victims wanted nothing to do with Trump specifically, because this is the last person that's able to offer comfort or empathy to anybody. Some of the victims reportedly just weren't accepting visitors or weren't in a physical condition to accept visitors, and that's understandable as well. So the Trump administration learned about a baby that had been orphaned by the shooting, a 2-month-old baby, both of whose parents had been killed in the shooting. Donald Trump heard about this and had the baby brought back to the hospital where Trump was after having been discharged, the University Medical Center, El Paso, and was in a truly vile and disgusting photograph, looking absolutely thrilled with the same smile and double thumbs up that Trump employs after, cheating on a golf tournament and winning or whatever, while Melania Trump holds the baby. This is the epitome of a disgusting photo op. This is not how normal people function and how they behave in society. A normal person wouldn't have had the baby brought back to the hospital. A normal person wouldn't look ecstatic to be photographed with a baby whose entire life has just been turned upside down by the brutal murder of both of the baby's parents. And what's even worse is that during this visit to El Paso, Donald Trump bragged about the crowd size the last time he was in El Paso. This video is of Trump speaking to emergency workers, first responders, people working hours and hours to try to clean up the tragedy that was this horrific mass shooting, which politically Donald Trump is unwilling to do anything about. Here is Donald Trump saying, you know, I had just such a great crowd last time I was here, and making fun of Beto O'Rourke.
I was here 3 months ago. We made a speech, and we had a what was the name of the arena? That place was packed, right?
I was front row.
Right? The judge is a respected
I was front
guy.
row.
What was the name?
I was front row in there.
Oh, good. Come here, man. That was some crowd.
Thank you for
And we had twice the number outside. And then you had this crazy Beto. Beto had like 400 people in a parking lot.
He's meeting with first responders, and he makes fun of another presidential candidate who's actually from El Paso and who actually shows empathy and understanding for the tragedy that has been suffered. And he talks about the size of his crowd the last time that he was there. What's most notable here? Is it Trump's lack of empathy? Is it, again, like, is this cognitive decline? That always comes up, but I don't want to give Trump an easy out. He may genuinely just be a terrible person who doesn't care about anybody else, but cognitive decline comes up again. He doesn't know to do anything other than thumbs up and grin when a photograph is being taken. How sick or terrible of a person do you need to be to think using an orphaned boy as a photo op prop and grinning your way like a doofus through it is even remotely appropriate? And then to brag to the people there about the size of the crowd the last time you were in El Paso. And it sort of makes sense that for Donald Trump, he thinks of all of these visits as just another visit. In other words, the last time Trump was in El Paso, he had a big crowd. He's back for another visit, so he talks about the crowd last time. It's no different that last time it was a Build the Wall MAGA rally, and this time it's because of a mass shooting at which a whole bunch of people died and were injured. For Trump, it's just another visit where he believes himself to be the center of attention, believes that he should be the center of attention, and believes that what everybody cares about is getting pictures with him and hearing about how great his last visit was and how stupid Beto O'Rourke is or whatever else. Consider for a second who benefits from this photo. It's not the baby. It's not the hospital. It's not the other victims. This is a photo that only benefits Trump, particularly when you consider that the baby had already been discharged and was asked to come back by Donald Trump and his administration. And by the way, I mean, I don't even know that it makes sense to go down this road because it's just, you know where it'll go. The baby being Hispanic, who knows how that is going to be spun by Trump and the administration. And, Trump does show empathy. It's not fair to say that Trump doesn't care about the kids in cages, the Latin American kids in cages. Look at Trump in the picture with the baby. Well, the baby was a prop in the picture, and Trump was grinning like a buffoon and holding two thumbs up. An unconscionably vile moment of the Trump presidency. And there have been many, but really summed up incredibly concisely by this picture. I told you months ago that Donald Trump was preparing to censor the internet for political gain. And it's going to happen, or at least he's going to try, and I'm going to tell you about it. But let's think back to the foundation of all of this. The foundation of all of this actually goes to, quote, fake news. Fake news and talking about journalism licenses, as Donald Trump has done, and talking about shutting down certain media outlets, and talking about how social media is just all left-wing and they've really got to do something about it. I told you from the beginning it was all a pretext to eventually try to clamp down on internet speech politically, along political lines. And then a couple of months ago, Trump had, maybe it was a month ago, Trump had this just comically laughable social media summit at the White House. And of course, no left-wingers were invited. I pointed this out at the time. And of course, the entire pretext of the social media summit was that, oh, the right is being censored online and it's all so unfair. None of it is true, of course. And now Politico has learned over the weekend that there are drafts going around of an executive order by Donald Trump, which would be a truly authoritarian nightmare, the likes of which I don't believe we've ever seen before in the modern sort of internet news era. What we know so far is a draft of the order exists. It would allow the administration to fight back against what they say are liberal cesspools on social media. And it is believed that there would be penalties for a social media company that, quote, censors political viewpoints. And this is, I can't, it's almost impossible to explain the severity of what is going on. Now, no one yet has gone on record about what the penalties would be to social media platforms, but this is truly a free speech horror. Let me explain to you why it's so dangerous. Twitter has policies, for example, against bullying trans people by misgendering them. As just one example, the left believes this is simply an issue of treating people correctly. It's an issue of internet bullying, period. It's not a political issue in the same way that we'd not argue today that a policy against calling black people the N-word is not a political issue. Most of us, I know that there are some out and out racists who would disagree, but in 2019, most people understand a policy on a social media platform against targeting black people with the N-word is not a political policy. It's just we treat people in a respectful way, in the way that they should be treated. That is the view of Twitter when it comes to deliberately misgendering people to the point of it being bullying. The right believes and has said that merely having a policy around bullying that includes how you gender people on the internet is a left-wing bias. So this gets us back to Donald Trump's potential internet censorship policy. A policy like what Donald Trump is proposing would supposedly prescribe punishments for limiting political speech. And they would argue that a policy against anti-trans speech, including deliberately misgendering people in a way that is bullying, is politically biased action by Twitter. They would argue that Twitter, by not allowing incessant misgendering to the point of bullying, Twitter is silencing a political viewpoint, which I guess is the political viewpoint that it's fine to misgender trans people deliberately to the point of bullying. Can you see how dangerous this is? This is an incoming fascistic restriction on speech from those who claim, remember, that they're all about speech. They don't want to limit speech. And we can actually simplify a ton of what's underlying this. Trump doesn't like people saying things about him on the internet. And he wants to find a way to either make it illegal or to make it punishable by fines or some kind of other penalty. Of course, there are a lot of right-wingers who have other priorities here, and they happen to line up with Donald Trump. They believe social media is all left-wing. All that stuff, they do believe it. But it's super easy to get Trump on board by telling him, Mr. President, you can punish the companies that are allowing all of these mean things to be said about you. These are private companies. Conservatives supposedly are all for private companies making their rules and functioning with as little regulation as possible. Why don't conservatives just leave these platforms, start their own, sort of like a gay couple finding a different baker to bake them a cake? The truth is it's a lie. They don't really like private business and a marketplace of ideas if the ideas of the business or the marketplace aren't the ones that they like. If anything, Twitter is going easy on things that violate their terms and conditions, because if Twitter actually enforced the terms and conditions on Donald Trump's Twitter account, he would have been banned by now. Trump regularly bullies people on Twitter. Trump regularly threatens violence on Twitter. The one sort of glimmer of hope here, because this executive order, from what we know so far, looks truly horrifying, the one glimmer of hope is that courts strike this down. But remember that increasingly Trump controls the courts. Trump has 2 Supreme Court justices that he has selected. I believe Trump has now selected 25% of, it may be district and appellate courts. We did the story last week and I forget the numbers. But the point is, Trump is increasingly controlling. Every month, Trump has more control over the court system that would ultimately adjudicate whether this incoming executive order is even legal. So we've got to get him out now, which really means November of 2020. I don't know any other way around it. It must be done, because this now is starting to become a true authoritarian nightmare, even for things as simple as just speech on the internet. As soon as I have more details about the executive order draft, I will absolutely get them to you. Make sure you're following The David Pakman Show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. I did post a few hours ago a tomato update, my tomato plants. Big developments with my tomato plants in the literal and proverbial sense over the weekend. And I posted a story to my Instagram page. david.pakman. Check that out. We'll take a quick break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It is great to welcome back to the program today Dr. Aubrey De Grey, who is the Chief Science Officer of SENS Research Foundation, which is a biomedical research charity based in California, developing new therapies to combat aging. We've talked to him over the years a number of times. Great to have you back, Aubrey.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
For people who, I'm increasingly following the space that you work in. There are all sorts of subreddits about longevity and curing aging and using similar language to language that I at least first heard from you when I saw your 60 Minutes appearance. At this point, who knows how many years ago it was. So in some sense, the movement is getting more traction in the terms that you've sort of defined for it. But has there been progress in the goal of curing aging?
There's been enormous progress. Yes, it was 2006 that I was on 60 Minutes, so it's been a long, long time. But yeah, I mean, the reason why there is progress in the conversation, in the language that's being used, is simply because there has been progress in the laboratory and even in the clinic. And it's really night and day how different things have become, even in the last 3 or 4 years. Essentially, the science has been, plodding along slowly but surely. And, every publication that comes out is just one small step towards towards a real comprehensive solution. And therefore, it's one small step in terms of the credibility of the idea. And really, things have started taking off. The work that we do at SENS Research Foundation has, in many cases, moved out into the private sector in the sense that we've been able to spin out projects as startup companies, which have been able to attract good investment. That's really important, of course, because as I've always said, the level of financial support for this work is the rate limiter. There is no question we could be going faster. And there are lots of people out there with deep pockets who are willing to be comfortable with high risk, high reward investments, even though they are very uncomfortable with high level philanthropy. So that means that these projects that have been spun out are now being funded at a level which, honestly, I think suffices. In other words, it makes the rate limiter be the actual science rather than the money. And of course, that's just the first step. As such things move on, they go into clinical trials, we get even more excitement and it becomes easier to get the money. So now at SENS Research Foundation, we still have a bunch of projects. We're not yet at the position of being able to kind of declare victory and say that other people can do everything. But we have definitely been able to slim down, narrow the range of areas which we feel are still being neglected by other people, and therefore focus more intensively on them.
So you've previously said that you believe the first human that will live to 1,000 has already been born. And there will be a lot of people who might think, over the last 10 years that David's been talking to Aubrey, I don't know that we're really closer to that. Can you talk about some of the specific advancements you believe there have been in the last 10 years?
Sure, absolutely. Well, so first of all, let's remember how I achieved that conclusion, that prediction in the first place. First of all, we have to remember that the idea that people alive today could live to 1,000 does not equate to the idea that within the next couple of decades, we will develop therapies that completely eliminate aging, which is what would be required to actually give us a life expectancy in 4 digits.
Sure.
What it means instead is that we will develop therapies which give maybe only a few decades of additional life, but they give that additional life to people who are already in middle age at the time, which means that we rejuvenate those people and buy ourselves, the scientists, time to make the therapies a bit better and give the same people version 2.0 of the therapies a few decades later that give them a few more decades of additional healthy life, and so on. So basically, it's all about keeping one step ahead of the problem. And it's very clear that once we get even a couple of decades of additional life for people who are already in middle age by genuine rejuvenation therapies, that it will become progressively easier to stay one step ahead of the problem. So that's how I come to the conclusion that we can basically forget about aging once we've got those couple of decades. Then the question is, are we closer to getting those first couple of decades? And the answer is absolutely. The things that we can really point to that show that we're getting closer are, of course, different depending on how deep you want to get into the science. But even at the level of, headlines in the newspapers, we are seeing very clear progress. Perhaps the most conspicuous example is Unity Biotechnology, which is a company explicitly working on rejuvenation, on eliminating a particular type of damage, namely senescent cells. And they've already got into clinical trials as of less than a year ago, I guess it was. But they've also been able to attract very, very large amounts of investment. They were able to bring in more than $300 million about 2 years ago now. And that was before they'd even begun that first clinical trial. That's the kind of money that biotech companies normally bring in when they're already in phase 3. So that really gives you a sense of the magnitude of the buzz around all of this in the investment sector. And of course, the reason they're getting this money is because they're getting good results in the lab. And incidentally, they still are. The first clinical trial came back really, really promising. So that's just one example. But the reason why we were able to spin out so many startups, so many projects into startup companies, which are not doing as well as Unity, but they're doing well, is simply the same thing. That work in the laboratories of the academics that we've been working with all this time, and of course in our own labs as well, has actually given sufficiently concrete actual results that have been able to be published in high-profile journals and so on, that the investors have started to feel that the time is right. So, you wanted an example. Let's take arteriosclerosis, the stiffening of the arteries. That's caused mostly by a chemical process called glycation. And the chemical and molecular nature of it has been understood for a long time, but actually repairing that chemical change in the arteries is something that people had totally given up on. And we funded a group at Yale University for a number of years to actually work properly on this. And they had great success. We had a first breakthrough that got published in Science magazine, the most prestigious scientific publication in the world. And that work then proceeded with the development of enzymes that can indeed restore the elasticity of the arteries by essentially reversing this chemical change. And that was sufficiently impressive that we've now spun that out into a company that's in the process of getting financed. We've done the same thing with atherosclerosis. We've done the same thing with macular degeneration. So this is happening time and time again.
And if people want to sort of think about the different categories of technologies or treatments that might someday be available, do you have a strong feeling about whether the future of this field is in medications that are taken the way medications are taken today, nanotechnology that can do repair at the cellular level is another idea, focusing on curing diseases that are more the diseases that one gets when they live longer rather than the sort of contagious disease that often significantly limits life expectancy. Is there one area that you think is the area of priority here?
Well, that's more to do with the mode of delivery. And I believe that the way that these therapies are going to be delivered is probably going to be rather similar to what we see today. Most of it will be by injections, because we'll be putting things into the bloodstream. So, just in the same way that we vaccinate today, some of this will actually be immunotherapy, stimulating the immune system to do things that it doesn't naturally do well enough. But a lot of it will be stem cell therapies and gene therapies, so injecting engineered DNA in engineered viruses of some kind. So from the point of view of the recipient, the patient, it'll look pretty normal. One thing we've always got to remember, though, is that we're not talking about curing anything. We're talking, the word cure has too much baggage around it, so I have to be very careful with this. When you cure an infectious disease, that means you remove it from the body so that the person doesn't actually suffer from that disease, unless they get reinfected. Whereas aging is a side effect of being alive in the first place, and we don't want to cure being alive in the first place. So what we need to do instead is clean up the side effects, the damage that the body does to itself in the course of its normal operation, clean that up periodically so that it never reaches a level of abundance, a level of contamination, if you like, that exceeds what the body can tolerate.
Yeah, so that's actually, there's this idea that is often repeated, which is that at a physical level, the body seems to sort of top out even potentially at living 110 or 120 years. Is that something that you, accept and believe that that's what it is that you are working to change, or actually reject it and have a different thought altogether about that?
It's what we're trying to change. When people say there's a natural limit to how long people can live, clearly what they're actually saying is conditional on the availability of the medicines that exist today. We can't say anything about what medicines of the future might do to transcend that so-called natural limit. And the whole point of medicine, just like any other technology, is to change the way that the world is so that it doesn't behave the way it naturally does, but rather we manipulate it. So, yes, absolutely. That limit is, there's a great deal of noise made about that limit. And I honestly feel that that's a bit of a problem, that people it's part of this, what I call the pro-aging trance. When somebody does a study, even a really poor study, whose conclusion is that that we can't get beyond 115 or 120 or whatever, it'll get published in really high-profile journals, as if it was actually important, when in fact it's really just hype, right? So, of course, yes, that's exactly what we're trying to change. We're trying to keep people healthy for a longer period than they would naturally be healthy for, and that will have the side effect of keeping them alive longer on average.
What is your thought about life expectancy recently being down a bit in the United States? Is that even, are you working in a completely different way where these year-to-year shifts don't really have any bearing on the type of work that you're doing, or is that something of concern?
It's completely different. Yeah. Of course, it's a concern in another sense. I don't like the fact that life expectancy is stagnating, but of course we know, excuse me, a large part of why that is, a lot of it's to do with lifestyle. And sure, that's nothing to do with what we're doing, what we're working on. Of course, it may have an impact. What we're working on may have an impact on the limits to longevity that are created by lifestyle, in the sense that once we get really good at repairing the various types of damage that the body does to itself, then it won't really matter if you have a lifestyle that slightly accelerates the rate at which the body is creating that damage in the first place. It just means that you'll have to, apply these therapies a little bit more thoroughly and a little bit more frequently than if you were living the way your mother told you to.
Do you have either a diet, exercise, or lifestyle regimen that is in any way informed by the research that you are involved in and follow closely?
No, I don't, but that's not because I think that such things are a bad idea. It's because, number one, I happen to be very well built. I'm just really, lucky guy in terms of my constitution, and whenever I get my biological age measured in any way, I always come out way younger than my actual age. So for me, there's kind of an if it ain't broke, don't fix it logic here.
People may not know, but you're actually 105.
Yeah. But the other thing is that, of course, I spend my life running around the world. There's one thing I do that's definitely bad for my longevity, which is I don't get nearly enough sleep. But, I figure I'm hastening the defeat of aging by a larger amount than the amount that I'm shortening my life. So I think it's okay. I'm just being flippant, of course. So no, but the thing about lifestyle and diet for other people is we know that there are some people out there who have, drawn a short straw or two genetically or whatever. For example, people like Ray Kurzweil, who've come down with type 2 diabetes in their 30s, right? Yeah. And people like that we probably can substantially normalize their rate of aging through the kinds of medicines and supplements that exist today. So that's great. But for people who are already doing averagely well, especially people like me who are doing really well, we know, I think we can say very confidently that there's nothing that anybody can do that will give more than a couple of years of additional healthy life. Now, a couple of years is better than nothing, so I'm certainly not objecting to that. But also, we have to remember that the things that a person should do are different from one person to the next. Some particular diet or supplement may be important for one person and some for another, because there's minor, really, really nuanced differences in their genetics or whatever. And it's really hard to find that out except just by experimentation. So when people ask me, what should I do? Should I do an Atkins diet or a paleo diet or whatever? I say, I have no idea. I say, what you need to do is pay attention to your own body and do what works.
No question about that. Yeah. And a lot of fields, even in medicine, going increasingly in that direction of really customized treatments, even for the conditions that we do start to have more of a grasp of how to treat. We've been speaking with Dr. Aubrey De Grey, the Chief Science Officer at SENS Research Foundation. Aubrey, so great to talk to you as always.
Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Bernie Sanders is either taking a call it like I see it approach with Donald Trump's idiocy, or he's simply gotten pushed over the point at which he's sick and tired of the idiocy of this administration. But he is now being targeted because he was so mean to Trump on Twitter and so unpresidential, because he said Donald Trump's belief, or at least statement, that climate change is a hoax makes him an idiot. That's quite simply what he tweeted over the weekend. Quote, Donald Trump believes climate change is a hoax. Donald Trump is an idiot. Oh no, what a mean, unpresidential, immature thing to say about... Stop the concern trolling, okay? These concern trolls have no leg to stand on. You should pay no attention to them. Remember that as this was happening, Donald Trump was tweeting basement-dwelling conspiracy theories about Jeffrey Epstein and the Clintons. He was having a 2-month-old orphaned baby brought back to a hospital for a sick photo op with him and Melania. If the argument is that Bernie is unpresidential in this tweet, what about Donald Trump's years of attacking people and ideas and the truth on Twitter endlessly in a completely irrational and unpresidential way? You have no leg to stand on. Trumpists don't really care about unpresidential on Twitter, because if they did, they'd never have voted for Donald Trump in the first place, or at minimum would have stopped supporting Trump by now. Bernie is right. Trump is an idiot. But I actually don't believe Trump thinks climate change is a hoax in reality. Trump thinks that dealing with climate change, accepting it, accepting that humans are impacting it, making policy as a result of that acceptance, would be bad for him and for the businesses of his friends, period. In the meantime, Trump insists it's a hoax, and it does convince a lot of people that it is straight up a hoax. People who have nothing to gain, by the way, from pretending that it's a hoax like Trump and his friends do. But I actually believe Trump knows climate change is not a hoax. I don't think he really understands the specifics of it. He doesn't seem to read anything. He doesn't seem to listen in depth to any issue. But I think that this is for his own gain, that he asserts that it is a hoax, and people get convinced by it. And the concerted effort to suppress information about climate change and climate science is too much for just believing that it's a hoax. It's what you need to do when you know it's not a hoax, but you've got to pretend it is by covering up all of the serious information about it, which they've been doing within the USDA. They've been doing it within NASA. They've been doing it elsewhere. And I want to sort of flip this around. Anyone who's not taking climate change seriously as a matter of policy must be ridiculed. It would be immoral not to ridicule Donald Trump, whatever his sincerely held belief is about the climate change issue, for even propagating the idea that it is a hoax. He needs to be ridiculed. It is immoral. Every single day, we're falling further behind in actually dealing with the climate crisis. Every day, Trump is doing the opposite of what should be done, not publishing research from his own administration, but rather suppressing it, not strengthening standards on vehicle efficiency and more, but rather weakening them. And this is actually super straightforward. It's not the language we might have expected in politics 10 years ago. Donald Trump is an idiot from a 70-something-year-old senator. But this is the Trump era. This is not a theoretical discussion about whether or not Bernie should or shouldn't be using this language. The content of Bernie's tweet is effectively accurate. If the argument is it's not presidential language, go talk to Trump about his language because he uses that language all the time. But if you are focused on the language, you're ignoring that Bernie Sanders is right about the critical reality of dealing with the climate right now. Trump is not doing it. And I say good for Bernie. And people call in and say, David, do you think that the Trump presidency, even after he's gone, is going to maintain an effect? And the answer is yes. Donald Trump's presidency, even after he's gone, will open up the door to more Trump-like ignoramuses to be elected to office, state, local, national, wherever, because they are seen as legitimate voices in the political discussion, which they should not be. They should be laughed at. Again, as I said, if Donald Trump wasn't given a small loan of $1 million to start a business, his rantings would be the thing you would expect to see from the guy who just urinated on the subway tracks before going back underneath the stairs while yelling at everybody who's down there. But he's in a different position because of a financial thing. So that has been legitimized. That idea, these types of people have been legitimized as politicians with valid voices by the Trump administration. Not that everyone shouldn't be heard, but just because someone should have the right to vote doesn't mean that they should be president of the United States. We're talking about two different things. And the coarsening of the language, quite frankly. I don't think there's any putting the genie back in the bottle or putting the toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak, with the sort of discourse that has become legitimized over the last few years. And it's not just going to be Republicans who sort of take to that discourse. So what I say is, on the subject matter, on the merits, good for Bernie. And the criticisms about it being the wrong language, well, go and talk to Trump about the wrong language. Joe Biden has had an unfortunate gaffe that some are saying is representative of his underlying racism. Others are saying it's representative of just his underlying ignorance. And even others are saying it's representative of his underlying sort of slowness and confusion that some believe he's experiencing cognitively. Biden said, poor kids are just as smart as white kids. Check it out.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids. No, I really mean it, but think how we think about it.
So the interpretation is that he meant to say poor kids are just as smart as wealthy kids, but instead he said white kids, both start with a W. And then he sort of smoothed it out by listing a few types of kids and made it seem like it was his plan all along. Poor kids are just as smart as white kids, wealthy kids, Asian kids, Latino kids, etc. And there are two sides here. And I think ultimately that's actually an irrelevant debate. Was this a gaffe? It was a gaffe in that it sounded really bad. Is there anything here that confirms some kind of inherent racism by Joe Biden? Not inherently, but again, it does not sound good. There are lots of people in this country who do straight up believe that white kids are smarter than poor kids, and poor kids they mostly see as being non-white. Like, that's not a completely uncommon belief in this country. We know that exists. The overwhelming majority of those voters aren't voting in the Democratic primary anyway, so that actually seems like a bit of a departure from the key issue here. Is this evidence that Joe Biden is inherently racist? It's not evidence by itself. It is evidence that Biden is some combination of sort of tired and maybe out of touch in terms of how we discuss some of these issues today. But then there's really a more serious issue here, that even if poor kids and wealthy kids in the United States have the same potential at birth in some kind of, genetic basis, there are countless studies that show that poverty does negatively affect academic outcomes and ultimately life outcomes. The real important issue here is that poverty hurts the potential of kids after they are born. Hunger hurts the potential of kids to do well in school. Absent parents hurt the potential of kids. Lack of access to educational resources hurt a child's potential. That's a real takeaway. That's a real issue. And the same people on the right who are just saying, oh, look at racist Biden. Okay, Biden may have antiquated beliefs on race. He may be racist. He may have just misspoken. Could be some combination of these things. But all of those people who are just saying, look at racist Biden, they don't want to deal with the destructive effect of poverty on educational and career outcomes. Poverty really hurts your ability to do well in school and ultimately in life. If you want to take this seriously, rather than focusing on, the Biden gaffe element, which is not new. Biden is hugely gaffe prone, and that's not anything we've avoided talking about on this program. Let's focus on dealing with poverty, which our elected officials and primarily those on the Republican side are completely unwilling to do. Republicans and Democrats the same on many issues, perpetuating the status quo that continues to have the same types of people put in elected office. We've talked about all of the ways that Republicans and Democrats are too similar, but we've also talked about many of the ways that Republicans and Democrats are very different. Republicans and Democrats very different in who, as presidents, they appoint to the Supreme Court and to lower courts. Very, very different. Republicans and Democrats very different on net neutrality. We talked about that last week in the context of Elizabeth Warren's new net neutrality and maybe as importantly, public internet proposal. And Democrats and Republicans very different in terms of what should the country be willing to do. And by the country, I mean people with our tax money in terms of how that tax money is allocated to deal with poverty, to deal with hunger. And in order to really do that, we have to understand the destructive effect that poverty has on kids in their ability to do well in life. And you can pick celebrities or athletes who were dealt a bad hand and did really well. They are statistically irrelevant. I don't mean I don't care about them, but I mean statistically, that is not even really an important part of the mobility conversation that we need to be having. And that's really the issue that we should be talking about here. But a gaffe, no question about it. Evidence that Biden is inherently racist, certainly not by itself. But very, very much hitting on an important issue that even though poor kids and wealthy kids may have the same potential, at least in some hypothetical sense, the reality of poverty is absolutely crushing. We have a voicemail number 2192 David P. There is a caller known to us as the Kansas Troll. This is a guy who actually called into Sam Cedars' show with horribly racist stuff. I think the video on Sam Cedars' channel is something like, incredibly stupid young man tries to argue with Sam about the bell curve or something like that. He's called into us before. He's actually called in live and he face planted with something about Alex Jones and me selling supplements. He will often call in and attack me for my position on a story I never covered. And that's exactly what he's doing today. He's resurfaced and he is attacking me for my terrible coverage of some Hispanic girl that was crying. I don't even know what he's talking about, but certainly not a story that I covered. Take a listen to this.
Blah, blah. Do you ever shut up, Backman? Anyways, you're talking about this little illegal immigrant girl crying,
What?
boo hoo. Oh, míos jueves, todas mi triste. Míos jueves. Like, David, nobody cares. Like, they can just take packing, just like you, David. You can go straight back to Argentina. I mean, you can go back to Europe. I mean, originally, where are you even from, David?
Right.
None of us even know where you're from, So anyways, this little Mexican illegal, she can, go work. She can go look for some trabajo, Dos mil huevos. ¿Qué pasó? CC, looking for work, yes? I can help her, David. If you want, get in contact with the little illegal girl, and I'll get her a job, all right? Thanks, Dave.
Yep, never covered the story, don't know what you're talking about. And it's weird, a lot of the trolls regularly call in to criticize me for my view on stories I've just not talked about. There's this other guy, the San Antonio troll. People wonder why when I see 210 pop up during live calls, I say San Antonio's a problematic area code for us. It's because of this San Antonio troll who also calls in with just devastating takedowns of me for stories I've not even covered. Really weird. Try calling and talking to me about something I've actually discussed. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We will talk about Walmart banning violent imagery, but not something else that they should probably ban if they want to deal with violence. We'll also talk about the most overworked cities in the United States. The list might surprise you. And lastly, the Space Force is closer to launching, and we will talk about that. All on today's bonus show. Get instant access by becoming a member or a patron. I'll talk to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.